Hello, my name is Ahnaf and welcome back to the React for Beginners series. In this video, I'll be going into more detail about components in React. In the last video, we have discussed a bit about the project structure and also functional components. Now, as I've said before, there is also another type of component in React which is called class components. So in today's video, we'll be going into more details about these types of components. So this is where we left off in the last video, and we have this header, and then we have my component. So we created this component called my component, and we basically just repeated it. So if I just remove this is just showing this text, and if you go to my component here, it's just an h1. So since we'll be making a to-do list, let's just make something like a header component. So let's remove the my component.jsx, and we can remove this from here. We can remove the import, and now if you save this, we only see this. So we can just go to the components folder and create a component called header.jsx, and in a typical class component, in a typical functional component, you just create an arrow function or just a normal function. But now we'll be making a component using classes. So this is how you make a class component. Now, first of all, you need to import React. So import React from React, and we will now create a class. So let's call it class header, and this should inherit from the react.component class. So we have to do extends react.component. Now, in every React class component, there should be a method called render, and that render method should return some JSX. Now, you could also write your own constructor if you want to have a class state, and we'll be talking about component states later on, but you can have your own constructor and also your own methods if you want to. But since this is just a component related video and we're not still like really into React, let's just make a render method, which is like a necessity for every class components. So render, and this should return some JSX. So let's do return, and then brackets, and then do div, and then just do h1 to-do list. Now if you press save, you see that nothing happens because we have to export the component from this file, and then we have to import it into our app. So export default header, or the name of your component, whatever you put there. And now we save this, and if you go to app.js, we can now import this component. We're using import header, and header is the name of our export. So header from /components/header. Now, if you still don't know why we use / here, we could have just easily used components, but the reason we use / is, like, I've explained this in the last tutorial, but I'm going to explain it again, is because when you don't use / Node will try to find a package called components in the node modules folder. So if you put / then node.js knows that we're trying to find something that is in the current directory where app.js is. So if we save this, and now if we remove this h1, and instead if you put the header component, and you have to like put this closing tag in components, and if we hit save, this is our to-do list. Now the font isn't looking really good, so we can just change a bit of the CSS. So we can go to our app.css, and now we can just remove some stuff and we can put this. Oh, that was like the old font. We could just put Helvetica, this one, and if we save this, and we got this font over here. So I don't think we have saved this yet. Let's remove this from here, and we got it. Yeah, now it looks better. So this is the header component, and we created the header component using a class-based component. So this is basically how class-based components work. you have to inherit from react.component, and it should have a render method. And now inside the render method, you should return some JSX. Now this is basically how class-based component works. But now a question may arise: when should I use class-based components and when should I use function-based components? Well, the answer is simple. Functional components are basically the most modern and newer way to make components in React, and functional components have a feature called hooks in React, which are basically like some event listeners, and they're like really powerful, and you can do tons of stuff with them. So we'll be going into hooks later on, but class-based components don't actually have a feature for hooks, so you can't use those awesome hooks features with class-based components, and class-based components are also old, so it's always better to use functional components. But if you still want to use class-based components, you can do it. So this is how you make a class-based components, but let's just remove this because we want to keep it as functional components. So const header, and let's make a function, then just return. This function should return div and then h1. Let's make it h2 because or else it'll be like too big. So h2 to-do list. Now if you hit refresh, we got this over here. So now we have this component here, and we could also make some more components. For example, we could have a component called to-dos. So these to-dos are going to be like instances of like to-do objects. So we could just put something like this over here. So we could just take a to-do over here. So to-do.jsx. And then we could just import React from React, and then just do const to-do return, and we could just return a div, and this div would be like an entry in the to-do. So we could do something like this over here. We could do wash the car or something like that. So let's just keep the paragraph tag wash the car, and we could just give it a class. So this is how you give classes in JSX. So class name equals to do. Well, let's just keep it to do, and now we could just export this. So export default to do, and now in the app.js we could import this. So we could do import to do from /components /to do, and now we can print this out. So to do, and if we refresh this, we see something like this. Now since this is going to be a to-do list and it has to be like a list, so either ul or li, we could probably make it a list. So let's do something like this. So ul, okay, or we could make another component here, which is going to be a good idea. So we could make a component called to-do items.jsx, and then we could just import React from React, and this to-do items.jsx would be basically like a container for all of the to-do items. So all the to-do items here will be inside this like list. So you could do something like const to-do items, and let's make it a function, and then return a. So we could just remove this input from here, and then we could do return, and we could just have a div, and then we could put a class name to maybe something like to do items, or let's do to do container, and then inside here we can like input some more to do items. So this should be a ul since we want an unordered list, and now inside this we could have our to do items. So we could import the to do component. So import to do from /to do, Now, why did I use just /to-do? Because we're using the to-do items.jsx, and the to-do component is inside the same folder, so we just use /, which means in the current directory. And now we could just put this over here. Could put this, so li, and then our to-do component. So I hope you understand what I did here. Basically, I created an unordered list, and this is like an entry in the list, and the entry is going to be our to-do component. So if you save this, and if you go over here, instead of putting it a div, you could just put a paragraph tag here. Divs aren't necessary, but it's a good thing to do. But since we're putting lists and we don't want block level elements, we'll be just putting a paragraph. And since it is a single parent, we don't have anything inside here or anything outside here, like not inside, like outside, so it's all good. And now you can export this with export default to do items. So now we can import it into our app.js component. So import to do items from /components to do items. Now we could put a line break here, and you see when you put line breaks here, it just makes another closing tag, but that's not how you want it. So in React, like, you can't make a tag. So like, you can't make a tag without a closing tag, so it must have a closing tag. But a way to bypass that is to just add a slash at the end. So we do this, and now we can put our to do items container here. And now if we refresh, we have this. We go to our developer tools and check why it's a bit off. You can easily find that this to do container is a bit big, and the line break is not necessary, so we could move the line break, and now it looks good. So we have this over here, and now we have a bunch of to do items, so I could put even more of them. I've saved this, and you see this is basically an entry of to do items, but you might want to like insert your own values, because right now it's just a static value. You might want to like insert your own values for like the to do list. So we can do that really easily, but that would be for the next video, where I'll be discussing inline JavaScript inside JSX. But this is basically how components and class-based components work. You can put components inside each other and then import those components, and I also showed you how to make class-based components. But it's not the best idea to use class-based components, since functional components are like the newer way to do it, and it has like more features. So I would always suggest you to use functional components, but if you ever really need to use class components, you can still use it. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. You can also dislike it if you don't like it, and I'll see you guys in the next video.